Okay, good. So we got H2O5 draft 2.3, which looks like it was just
I did
dated this morning.
This morning, yeah.
Good.
So this is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Counsel. In front of you, you have H205, an act relating to establishing the Small Farm Diversification and Transition Program. I've walked through this already with you once, but the Vice Chair has been working with me to make changes to this for the purpose of your committee amendment. So the first thing, well, actually, let me step back. You were all talking about setting guidelines or criteria for the 10 million for processing. I think you have a similar, it's a similar question for you is what criteria do you set for any program? And so here you're setting this up, and then what criteria do you want? So in talking with the vice chair, one of the things that was proposed is limiting the income or defining a small farmer by their income, which is what is done under the use value appraisal program. If you want to qualify for use value appraisal, you either get 50% of your income under the federal definition of the business of farming, or you get 50% underneath. And it's a little bit more complicated underneath the definition of farming in Vermont. So that is what this program will do. It's now not for small farms, it's for small farmers. And in small farmer, it'll be the Small Farmer Diversification and Transition Program. And a small farmer means anyone that earns at least 1/2 of the farmer's annual gross income from the business of farming, as that term is defined in the IRS code, is engaged in farming as that term is defined in 10 BSA 6001-22, regardless of the size of the parcel. So remember when I think I was in the first time, we were talking about how small farm is defined under the RAPs, and it has, you need, the minimum acreage you can have is 4 acres. But in most cases, you're going to need 10. And this is not an acreage limitation. When you go to the definition of farming, it's the Act 250 definition of farming. It doesn't have an acreage limitation in that definition. So it's just farming. And it's the things that you think of as farming. It's the growing of horticultural crops, maple syrup, bees, the list is long. And then it includes things that are not intuitively farming. Agricultural energy production, principally on the farm. Production of agricultural, of any product principally produced on the farm. Horses, 3 more equines. So it's a broader definition of farming. It's not limited by acreage. What will limit your eligibility is your income as a farmer.
Representative O'Brien?
Like, how does this work? I mean, taxes are so complicated at this level with, say, married filing jointly. Like, who's the farmer? Maybe both, spouses farm.
When you are filing that federal income tax return, you are supposed to denote if any of that is from farming, because that is tracked by the USDA, how many people identify themselves as a farm.
And you file a schedule that says your
File a schedule. It's
then of your household income, does that throw it off?
well, that's a question for you. If you want to, again, you're the policymaker. You make the criteria and what percentage you want to set, and whether or not it's the applicant or the household. That's really up to you.
Representative Rice?
So we've heard that one way to sort of deal with the fact that often there's a married couple, they have a farm, one of them works off farm in order to make it work. And that off farm income represents significantly more than half of their income is that they form an LLC and lease or rent the farm to that. Would that still be a way? Would you
Yes.
still be declaring the LLC's income
Yes,
as
the
the?
LLC would be the applicant. The LLC would be its income would be the only relevant income. So that's definitely a way to do it.
Go ahead, John.
Oh, yeah, so an LLC can be a farmer, but, okay, like an individual, but they don't have a shovel.
So the definition of person, the general definition of person includes pretty much every type of legal entity that you can think of.
Got it.
So that's what's applied unless you say you don't want it to go to corporations or other legal entities. A corporation is a person.
So this isn't using any of the RAPS definitions of that $2,000,
It's not using that.
which is a much lower bar, it seems to me.
Right, moves away from that. And just says you have to show that you made 50% of your income, either under the federal definition or under the definition of farming in Act 250. Now, I drew the second subdivision A2. I drew that from use value as well. The issue with that is the definition of farm products. Use value doesn't define farm products in statute. Now PVR has rulemaking authority, but I could not find that. So I reached out to Abby Shepherd. I could not find the definition of farm products in that rulemaking authority. I reached out to Abby Shepherd, our tax attorney who used to work at the Department of Taxes, to see if she could track down the definition of farm products that they use. But you can define that however you want to.
So is this likely then, you mentioned the bar being higher or lower, is this likely to result in a smaller universe of eligible persons?
I think if farms are managing themselves as described, I think you're gonna have a larger universe of people.
With this language? Representative Templeman.
So this is more to the authors. I'm kind of curious, considering that if I understood the intention of this was to try to help conventional dairy farmer types to transition to another type of, if they're operating as a dairy farm right now and not making income, that 50% mark may exclude them.
I don't know if that's how that works, but can you add clarity to that? I mean, they're still going to have to, I mean, there is still income, whether it's a loss or not, but
Right, it could be your gross income.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
and I'm happy, I can explain the reasoning of why we shifted to that definition as
No,
opposed to small farms.
I'd actually like to hear that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the idea was to be more inclusive of, say, those smaller farmers who don't meet that 10 acreage requirement because they just are leasing, say, 4 acres or 5 acres of land. And that's a lot of new beginning farmers. That's a lot of BIPOC farmers. That's a lot of folks who are really looking to be in that sector, but would be excluded from this grant. I mean, that's also small farmers who have like small goat milking operations and everything, that they're just not reaching that, and we don't want to exclude them from that as small farmers because they don't meet that definition. So this would include them in that, in addition to all of the other small farms that would be eligible for this funding as well. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
Okay, great.
That's an elegant solution.
You know, it was after hearing the tax folks come in that I was like, Mike, can we do this? Yeah.
Good job.
should I move on?
One other question, or at least one
Yeah,
other?
but doesn't, if I'm a goat farmer and I make $7,000 a year with my goats, I'm capped out at making less than 14,000, or I can't be in this program?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty
That would
much.
describe me, actually.
Well,
Add 1,000 to it, but.
right, I mean, our situation, we have a, wedding event situation on the farm, but
Right.
weddings don't count as accessory on farm business. We make way more from that than our farming. So that would throw us off too.
It would, and I think the idea behind it is that, not to say that you're not engaged as agriculture as your primary source of income, but we do want this to be for farmers who are really dependent upon this as their primary source of income.
Okay.
And I love what you do, but that is really to make sure that this is agricultural folks who are really getting this money. The hard thing,
Okay.
but yeah.
No, just anecdotally, it seems like I know of so many Vermont farmers, like I said, that you have to have a job off the farm to subsidize your farming
It's true,
for at the starting position.
right. And you're considered farming under the RAPs?
I mean, we make more than 2,000, but if by this definition, we would not be farmers.
Right. Right.
Representative Rice?
Could we say that people could qualify using either of the definitions?
It is, it's an or.
Yeah.
Is or,
Oh, do you mean,
I mean, income or RAP.
you could, that's fine. You could say that you're a small farm, that's defined under the RAPs. For a small farm, I would say subject to the RAP.
so then if you have the Venn diagram, you're taking everybody who's either in one or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
It gets everyone that's 4 acres to 4 to 10 acres or above. And then it gets people that are below that 4 to 10 acre threshold, depending on what they're doing. That can show that they may have their income from either the federal definition or the state definition. And so the universe would be pretty comprehensive.
So, okay, good. Representative Levitt, did you also have
It's been answered. No, I figured it out. Thank you.
Okay, well, good. Why don't we can come back to this but I think have a better sense now of what we're trying to do.
So I'm gonna put that as a markup note, small farm under RAPs.
So that's 2,000 plus the 10 acres or 4 acres, right?
Right.
RAP
Required agricultural practices.
Okay, should I move on?
Yes.
Okay. So the program is created at the agency to provide small farms with state financial assistance to diversify production on a farm or to transition from one form of farming to another. Assistance under the program shall be in the form of grants. Small farmer diversification and transition grants shall be used for diversifying ag commodities produced on a farm, transitioning a small farm from one form of farming to another, on-farm processing of ag commodities on a small farm, and development of accessory on-farm businesses on a small farm.
Is any of this new language from previous draft?
No, not really.
Does this get us in trouble because we've sort of changed the thrust of this to a small farmer rather than small farm?
Why would it get you in trouble?
Oh, it's just because it's not everyone who's a small farmer would be on a small farm. I don't know. Just checking the language, that's all.
I
think it would be.
Be the same.
I see what you're saying. So it said produced on the applicant's farm. I could see how that would.
Yeah, because then it makes other people qualify.
Language of
What if we said like diversifying commodities produced on a small farm
By a small farmer.
by a small farmer? And then we have a height requirement. I'm just kidding.
I don't think it's very quaint.
Too early in the morning for that.
And small farm only really goes back to RAPs, right? It's
Right.
not really an IRS language, it's not
No, it is not.
Act 250 or
Right.
current use, right?
Right.
I had another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there somewhere at the agency or in statute, the definition of what's a form of farming? Because if I go from carrots to rutabagas, is that changing farming or I'm just saying, what are the silos here? So dairy to produce, or, Is there a definition for that?
A definition of what farming is.
To go from one form to another?
So in line 4, transitioning a small farm from one form of
Like
farming to
cows to
another.
goats,
I
dairy.
don't think it's produce to different produce type. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago.
Well, you don't think that, but he's asking, is that defined somewhere?
It is not defined in
What
statute.
do we want to do, and do we need to be specific, in the language?
Like dairy to dairy, does that not count?
Turn to you.
I know, well, and I'll turn to you. Do we,
Okay.
I mean, our intent of the language being so vague was not to limit any creative opportunities that a farmer could look to diversify or add additional income. It is just based on the market, unlikely that people are adding dairy to it, but
But you could go from cows to goats.
you
That
could go from cows to goats, absolutely, right. And
And could you go from carrots to hemp? And that, rather than like carrots to rutabagas? Would that, because I'm still thinking like,
It really depends on what you want to do. Hemp is an agricultural product. It's an horticultural crop, and so are rutabagas.
right,
I mean, I think frankly, like, if there's a historic carrot farm and the carrot market dies and there's a need for rutabagas, we actually want them to be able to transition from carrots to rutabagas.
but do we
Using
then
this-
want to reward farmers who just plant carrots and as well rutabagas?
That is diversification, right?
Representative Tupperman.
So I think what is being said here is making a definition between what is a species change and what is a methodological change, right? Like there's how we farm and there's what we farm. So sometimes we have to change our methods depending on that species change. Like the equipment may be different to harvest a rutabaga than a carrot. Or it may be a different type of a grazing plan if you're doing goats as opposed to cattle. So maybe what we should focus on is the method change rather than the species change.
that's interesting, and I only raised concern on that being more towards conservation practices versus
Put guardrails on it.
practices for the purpose of diversifying the actual farming enterprise itself and not trying to adopt certain methodologies that would warrant a ecological or biological diversification definition. I think we're solely thinking of diversification in the terms of a produced product, not to say like trying to increase soil carbon or
Then
something, you know what I mean?
I would say then if the definition is product driven, then changing species or methodologies are included in that, right? Like you're talking product, you're inclusive of everything there.
What is the product in that
Well,
which you were referencing then?
For example, milk was brought up. So cow milk is definitely different from goat milk. So that's an acceptable shift because they're a different product.
Right,
Rutabagas and carrots, different product,
right,
eligible.
right.
But interesting, Dave, to go from, say, conventional dairy to organic. Is that a change, or I use a lot of phosphate, I'm going to regenerative farming now. Is that changing the form of farming?
I think it is because you're making conventional milk and then you're making organic milk.
So surfacing these questions is exactly the reason for having the conversation. And you can ask Jed if he wants to jump in, and then maybe the best thing to do is say, okay, we identified what some of the questions are, and then we'll step back, think whether this is the language we want, or if we want to make changes to, going back to what's the intent, if you're still clear on what the original intent was. Representative Lipsky.
Well, the Agency of Agricultural, Food and Markets has a category called lightly processed vegetables that allows a farmer to get them directly to a market. And that includes potatoes, beets, carrots, cabbages, squash, parsley, for example. There's another category, just called produce. And, and there are, there's over 20 categories from agroforestry, apples, beer, bees, honey, bread, cheese, dairy, eggs, grains, goats, grapes, grass-fed beef, hemp, hops, lightly processed vegetables, maple, meat, slaughter processing, poultry, produce, sheep, specialty foods, spirits, swine. I mean, to me, any one of those activities is farming. Maybe meat processing is different than farming, but it certainly could take place on a farm. Or if you raise grass-fed beef and you have the capacity to process and the capital to do that and diversify, that's
That would probably be part of the accessory on-farm business portion.
might be.
So, right, the purpose of this, and we're going to go down to, we're going to limit the grant to 15,000. So you're not going to make a humongous change for $15,000. But my intent, at least I thought intent would be that, just say you are a small dairy farm and you can't make enough income to carry the farm. Let's just say you decide you want to put in a couple acres of potatoes to supplement your income. Okay, you may need a potato planter, you may need a hiller, and you may need a digger. That's kind of what my thinking was, or if you grow vegetables and you want to build a farm stand.
So I was trying to find some,
Wasn't trying to make it very complicated so that the average person that doesn't have a hired grant writer can figure this out.
so there are other states that have a program like this. I was just trying to find the Wisconsin one that I knew of, but they don't define diversification. They just leave it up to the agency. When you don't define a term, the courts and the agencies are supposed to use the plain meaning of the term. So the plain meaning of diverse is to give variety to increase the variety of products, diversify a business, diversify production. I don't know if that's too broad for you, but that could be built into the definitions.
If I may, there's also the component to this that says the ways in which you are diversifying must have the potential or probability that it will bring income. And so it would be really challenging to demonstrate a practice that you're inserting for the purpose of biodiversity or ecological reasons, the ways in which that would garnish or bolster your income in a way. So I think that would, in essence, prevent that from being part of it, if that is helpful. And maybe Mike, I'm wrong, but
No, I think it's a limit.
yeah.
It's going to be a limit. If you can't show that you get potential income from the new product or the new form of farming, then you're not going to qualify. And you have to have a draft business plan to do it.
So that in essence feels like it sets a parameter, a guideline around what diversification or transition means in that context.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Representative Rice.
Just wanna, while we're still here, flag one more question on language in this section, which is the use of the word commodities. Just because it colloquially tends to mean certain crops, and I don't know if that's the intention or if it's defined elsewhere.
So that's really, that's an RAP term. And you could probably draw it out. and define it here for the purposes of this program, since the program will be broader in scope than just the RAPs. So if you would like me to do that, I can do that.
The alternative would be to say products.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get from Abby, what farm product means. They might just define farm products as ag commodities as defined under the RAPs, and then you're all set, right? And so that I think is a question that's outstanding. And if it's, you could honestly replace farm products in those two criteria for the farmer's income with ag commodities. That'd be fine. Because this is not tied to the federal program. You're just kind of using the Fed definition kind of as a criteria.
Got it.
Mike, are there cases where agricultural services makes you a farmer? You know, if I, essentially I'm a consultant, you know, I'm a horse person, but I help other horse people or.
Or farrier.
Yeah, hold on a second.
I'm just wondering if there's services in addition to commodities that make you a small farmer.
You guys don't have the green books in here anymore?
They're over there.
Cover in the window.
Okay.
Like, is Mary Lake a farmer, or if you take her away from her own personal sheep?
Or does she have, right, sheep sharing is a distinct business, slaughtering is
So yeah, there are.
artificial inseminator, right, and I go.
Yeah, that seems like a farming practice anyway.
There are some services, but it's really focused on horses. So farming under 6001 is the cultivation or other use of land for growing food, fiber, Christmas trees, maple sap, or horticulture on orchard crops. It's the raising, feeding, or management of livestock, poultry, fish, or bees. It's the operation of a greenhouse, the production of maple syrup, the on-site storage, preparation, and sale of agricultural products principally produced on the farm, or the on-site storage, preparation, and sale of fuel or power from agricultural products or waste principally produced on the farm. And here is where it is a service. The raising, feeding, or management of 4 or more equines owned or boarded by the farmer, including training, showing, and providing instructions and lessons. So that is not production of a product, that is a service. And then there's the,
So it's really economic based.
yes.
Okay, so certainly some questions there still to hash out. Why don't we
Okay.
continue through?
So when the applicant applies, they need to demonstrate to the secretary that they are a small farmer under that definition that you come up with. House not more than the number of animals specified under section 4857 of this title, which means they can't have more for dairy cows, 199 dairy cows. And it's like a few thousand chickens.
So that's RAP definition.
That's the RAP definition. And there is potential from the proposed diversification or transition to create additional income for the small farmer. They have a proposed plan for diversification or transition that includes possible markets for the proposed product and probable income. They are not permitted as a medium or large farm.
Any questions there?
Should I move on?
Yes, yeah, we're good.
So the secretary issues the assistance when funds are available. So that means if there are appropriations to it. The maximum amount of a grant shall be $15,000 per farmer per year. And all projects funded by the grant shall be completed within 12 months of receipt of the grant by the small farmer. moving on, the secretary provides public notice of available grants and to provide applicants with technical assistance in complying with application requirements. Secretary shall publish the program in newsletters, press releases, email, and other communications from the agency. They shall hold the application, let's just say process, open for at least 60 days.
Is that 60 days comparable to other programs?
Not necessarily. It can be 30, it can be 45. Some of the programs are open for a year.
Mike?
Is there ever any language in something like this that directs when that period should be, or is that typically left?
Yeah, you can do that too. You can say that the application is going to be open from whatever first of the month to whatever last of the month. Like the last time I did that was the first dairy assistance program under COVID. They had to apply by like November 30th.
Is there a way that you could have a small farm at a medium-sized farm? So for example, you know, this farm milks 250 dairy cows, right? So it's a medium-sized permitted farm. That the spouse wants to start on 10 acres, flower business with bees. Is there a way of splitting that off so that this grant would work for them?
If you split off the property either through lease or sale, form an LLC that's different and separate, and the cow farmer is probably not on the board or invested probably at more than 51%, then yeah, I think that's fine.
Essentially, right, like just somebody in the family wants to do their own little thing.
And people, you know, where that has come into play is prior to the accessory on-farm business language, that's what people were doing with the production of products that didn't qualify as farming.
Okay.
I think, on number 2 there, maybe we should just have it open all year.
Well, that goes back to whether this is a running award program. So if somebody's application comes in on November 2nd, does the agency have to wait until all applications are in, or can they start awarding on a running basis? And so
my concern and why I considered the 60-day period was that I wanted to make sure that there was equity within all applications going in and having proper time for the agency to review them all before somebody who was quick to the jump to put in an application and receive the funding faster than other farms who might not have even known that granting was open and available. So that was why that slight provision was put in there.
Fine.
Yeah,
I'll
okay,
leave it that way.
okay.
Okay.
but when you do it that way, you need to either say, once the applications are in, it's on a first come, first served basis, or you have to develop criteria for the award to give priority to certain applications versus others, in case you don't have enough money to meet all of the applications.
I think Mike had his hand up.
No.
Okay.
Good.
I think rolling applications are bad as a former grant person, for exactly the issues that Heather just brought up. I think first come, first serve is also bad. I think this should be, you have 60 days. starting, pick a time period that works best for the majority of farmers when they have time to actually do an application. And then, so you've got 60 days to get it in, and we will turn around these applications within X amount of time. But I do think it's get them all in, look at them all, rank them, create some criteria, which isn't as easy as it sounds. And then award, because then you're looking at everything and does put the onus on how well things are being publicized.
I totally agree. And the only concern was, what are those eligibility requirements that we're putting into it? And how would that make it more cumbersome or establish barriers for farmers who are trying to enter if we set those requirements? And we could be really intentional about those if we do decide to go that route. And I would definitely seek committee feedback on that, to be as inclusive as possible so as not to limit the creative flow of farmers trying to do this.
So Working Lands, for instance, has very, always oversubscribed, has very specific way of ranking proposals.
Right, and they've come up with
But they
that.
came up with them themselves, right? Yeah.
Were they charged with coming up with
They
criteria?
have authority to do that.
Authority, yeah. John?
And is that rolling admissions or is it merit based?
No, it's a priority system. I mean, they are over applied for
Can
pretty
we get
much.
them all in at once and then go through?
There's a cutoff.
I think, what was that?
I think so.
I think so too, because they do spend a ton of time reviewing the applications. And I think they do all of them before they award.
We heard yesterday, I think, while we were talking about the budget request, that they have a two-phase process. So I think they do it, they have a deadline and then a second deadline for follow-up material.
I will have to say that some people say that their process is cumbersome. Because of how many people are on the board. There's a lot of people on the board. That means there's a lot of opinions. The criteria used and the number of applicants. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of input to do that. I will say, with that said, that the people that are on the board right now are pretty good at it. In the past, there have been issues, but right now they're pretty good.
And I'd say that they span a very broad area, from agriculture, farming, meat production, forest products, and forest practice, loggers. And they are looking to, they really value, will this fill a void that's in demand or a priority? Will it add workforce? Is it likely to be profitable? Strict criteria about filling voids, adding workforce, and elevating that specific applicant's segment in the supply chain.
One thing you hear about Working Lands that everybody seems to like is that unsuccessful applicants, they help coach them for the next time. So you might want
They can
to
really-
add language about that in here.
Yeah,
If you have that sort of,
mindset of that,
or population
Yeah.
to stand up, that sort of thing.
definitely.
But Heather, I am very respectful and sensitive to some of the obvious goals in this bill. There are people that are desperate to get a stake in the ground, and if they're living in a tent, they want to try to produce a product or do something. This is a first-time opportunity. They're taking personal risk. They need help. We've heard this from rights and democracy people. These are not grabbing $250,000 grants like the Working Lands. This is 15,000. sensitive to the goals of this bill, and I think there's a need. But nobody's taken a bet on how long they survive or if it in fact does grow.
This isn't for new farmers.
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
There's no new farmer
You have to be diversifying or transitioning.
transition or diversification.
because you have to earn half your income from farming, so you can't be a new person for that.
You'd be on a different piece of land if you were a farmer or you worked in farming, but you had an opportunity to lease 10 acres. You were,
If you're already farming.
you were a farm worker,
Yeah,
but now you could go from being a hired hand to leasing.
Oh.
So that being a hired hand is not the production of farm products, which is what you need to do to qualify as income.
Good question.
So this is not, this as written, this bill would not
No, but,
provide funding for that.
but this bill as written, Representative Surprenant, can I reference the other bill?
yes.
There is another bill
Okay.
that would define new farmer, a disadvantaged farmer, and a veteran farmer. And they're basically built on a federal program that had similar terms. And so you can work in, I can get you a definition of new farmer. It's usually somebody who hasn't made their income from the business of farming in the previous X number of years, but is proposing to. And so that's something that I can get you if you want to look at that, or you just want to wait for that other bill.
If you're looking at me specifically, the leads on this bill, I think would be the more appropriate people to respond. I know we've had testimony from groups that pretty much feel they do not have access to farming, they're looking for help for it. So I have you point that question to Representative Surprenant or Representative Graham.
I don't know if this is the proper time to address that.
Right. Since it's addressed elsewhere.
Not. So I listened to some of the testimony from those groups. And one of the things that they asked you to do is challenge the constitutional limitations. And there are constitutional limitations. There's a pretty significant body of law that says when you're going to be prioritizing or awarding on a applicant's participation or membership in a protected class, that's largely unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Law. And I can get you a U.S. Supreme Court case out of Colorado, which has a very kind of tight summary about specifically that issue. And that doesn't mean you can't do it. And I'm not telling you can't do it. I'm just telling you that if you do it, that there may be challenges. You all get to decide what you want to do. And if you want to challenge those limitations, that's up to you.
So I think we're talking about a bill that is not in front of us and doesn't exist yet in an official form. So.
Because it's on the wall.
It is on the wall. Oh, okay.
Our wall or
Our wall.
some wall?
No, it's on our wall.
Well, we will schedule formally testimony on that bill at some point. But
I think it's 368.
I want to, Mike had his hand up, but then I also wanted to see whether we have a consensus yet on either change or as is, or still needs to be discussed on this point and then move on.
We can move it. My question is not relevant to the bill we're actually talking about.
Okay, good, thank you.
Ask Mike about it later.
So are we, do we need more discussion on on the question at hand here, do we have an agreement on what we want to see, or do we need to go offline a little bit and have some conversation?
I have one really quick question, which is, they're not permitted as a small farm or large farm, but what if getting this grant award makes them makes them go from a small to a medium farm?
It's at the time of application.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, that's what I figured. Just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Good question, yeah.
Is there a capacity to stand this program up at the agency? Or are they gonna say, oh, we need 125,000 to administer it?
So that's an interesting question. I will say that they stood up a program that was much bigger and had much more complicated eligibility requirements
During COVID.
without new staff. What they had to do is hire a software engineer to develop the application process. From my understanding, they've worked through some of those kinks and have a portal that you can use. It's not perfect. It's not what everybody thinks of as a portal. But they could, you should get testimony from them of what they would need. But I think they set up like a $30 million program in a short amount of time and moved the money as much as it was applied for. There were complaints, but it got done without a new significant amount of staff.
What was that first COVID program called? What was it? I mean, before ARPA, I can't even remember what it was called, that first COVID.
It was called the
CRF.
yeah, CRF,
Forward relief.
Coronavirus Relief Fund.
Okay.
On just one more point, and it's not in here, but there is no matching requirement for these
No
grants.
matching, yeah.
No matching requirement.
There is one other section of substance, it's the appropriation. It's $250,000. By rule, that means that the bill goes to the Appropriations Committee. Generally, what they do with bills like this is they remove the section from the bill and then add the appropriation to the relevant agency's budget. So you should just be aware of that. Whoever is going to be the reporter might get to House Appropes and they'll rip this out. And it's not the death knell, you just have to fight for an appropriation for it.
And is it in here that it's base continuing funding, or does it, then when they rip it out, it becomes one time?
Then you've got to hope that the agency comes forward in their budget next year with that as a proposal. And if it's not there, you have to then argue again for that appropriation.
So in-house, they really decide whether it's policy.
Because you're the policymaker and you're the purse string holder. So even though the governor brings forward the proposed budget, you are the ultimate decider on that question.
Mike?
Is the lack of a match requirement something that we would want to put in language in this if we wanted to be sure that there would not be a match required? Or is
I think that's a little bit of bootstrapping because there are other programs that don't require match, that don't have, does not require a match. The programs that have a match are pretty specific, 10% of the proposed project, and match can be provided with in-kind services, et cetera. I don't think you need that. I will also say that there are a ton of other requirements that you're not seeing in this bill. Because does everyone know what the administrative bulletins are? It's the requirements that the Secretary of Administration issues for all agencies to meet when they're either doing contracts or awarding grants or getting loans or doing any other kind of financial assistance. There is a specific one for grants And it has a lot of requirements in it. You don't get your full grant right away. They hold out a portion of your grant to see if you comply with the terms of your grant, and then they award the final part of your grant. It's basically a financial due diligence provision. And then there are some things that might seem onerous in there, like you can't owe taxes to the state. You can't be behind in your child support. Things like that.
The good standing stuff.
And so that, go ahead.
That Representative O'Brien just brought up a pretty good point, is that the agency has been moving towards, as an eligibility requirement in all programs, that you're in good standing with the agency. It doesn't mean the requirements of Administrative Bulletin 5, I think. It means that there's no enforcement action against you by the agency or the Agency of Natural Resources in some cases. I don't know if you want that built in here or not. It's really important in the water quality context when you're applying for a water quality assistance program, but you're violating water quality. Like that's really not how the environmental laws work. Like US EPA would be like, no way would we fund that.
Okay, well, I think we've reached the end of the bill here. So we got a few things to go back and review, make some decisions on, and then have you back in on that.
Okay.
We are scheduled next to take a look at the housekeeping bill, and we'll take a break before we do that. Let's take a break and we'll come back in